All right, so moving on from variables to arrays, you may remember from the JavaScript and jQuery sections that arrays are ways of storing a number of different values in the same object. That sounds weird until you see it in action. So let's create one straight away. We use exactly the same structure as with variables, so $, and then whatever you want to call the array. And then we're going to set this equal to an array. And then we just add the values that we want to put in the array. So we'll do the classic example, for me at least, of Rob, Kirsten, Tommy, and Ralphie. Then we want to see what this variable actually looks like. If we try and echo it, let's see what happens. We get a notice. So it's not quite an error, but it's a bit of a warning telling us that we're trying to essentially treat an array like a string because we're trying to echo it. But then it does it anyway, but all it does is tell us that it's an array. So echoing an array doesn't do anything particularly useful, but there is another command, print _r. The R there is short for readable, and print r is a great way of showing you what the contents of an array or any kind of object are. So let's have a look. There we go. And now we get a much more useful array, and then the 0th item in the array is Rob, the number 1 item is Kirsten, and then 2 is Tommy, 3 is Ralphie, etc. And if you've got a big array, it's worth noting that if you look at the page source, then it's actually really nicely laid out for you. You don't get the line breaks in the HTML, but you do on the page source. So that can be a handy way of working your way through a big array if you need to. All right, so that's how we create an array. In order to get some of the items, we can do something like echo, because we're displaying a string this time. We're just going to get one of the items, and then my array, and then just like in JavaScript, square brackets, and then the number that you want within the array. So quick challenge for you. Which of the 4 family members is this going to display? I hope you got it. It is, of course, Kirsten. Some of you may have said, well, it's going to display the first one, and that's Rob. But remember, arrays always start at the 0 index. So to display Rob, I'd need to do my array 0. And then so 0, 1, 2, 3. Of course, if I attempted my array 4, then I wouldn't get any output. I'd also get another notice saying that I'm trying to display an array index which doesn't exist. So let's go back to 3. There we go. Another way to define an array is to just create the values manually. So I could have another array, and I could set the 0th item in that to be, say, pizza, if we're doing an array of foods. And then I could set 1 to be yogurt, for example. And then let's have a look. If we display all of that, we get a normal array there. I think I'm just going to put in a couple of line breaks to separate all that out, so it's a bit clearer what's going on. Notice that we don't actually need to have 0 and 1 and then 2 and then 3 there. We could put whatever we liked. So if I wanted to jump for some reason to number 5, which might be coffee, then that works absolutely fine. And that's because PHP arrays are associative, meaning that you can put anything you like in the index column. So I could even go crazy and put a string in there. So my favorite food, could set that equal to ice cream, for example. There we go. And that sets the index as my favorite food. So that can be pretty useful if you've got some information about a user, for example, and you want to store that as an array. You can have name, username, password, whatever, right there. If you want to create an associative array like this, using indexes like my favorite food, and you want to do that straight away like we have here, then you can do that in a similar way as we defined my array up top. So let's create a third array, and we set it up in the same way. It's going to be an array, but we first put the index. So let's say we want a collection of languages here. So the index might be France, and then we use equals and greater than to create a sort of arrow, and then put the language. So that would mean that the index of France would give us French, and similarly for have USA is English, and Germany German. Don't forget the quotes. There we go. Let's just have a look at that. Pop in a couple of line breaks as well. Keep everything separate. There we go. So we've set up an array in a similar way that we did here, but all in one go. If you're going to do something like that, I would recommend having it nice and tidy. So something like that would be a nicer way to have it on your code rather than all in one line. Just a couple of things then before we move on. We can get the length of an array, that is the number of items in the array, using size of. So just like that, and then whatever the array name is. So I'm going to echo that. What should it be? Should of course be 3, because there are 3 items in the array. What if we want to add an item to the end of an array created like this? So a non-associative array with just 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. as the indices. That's easy enough. So we just have my array and then empty square brackets and then whatever we want the new one to be. So without giving anything away, for example, we might have Katie there, and then that would add Katie onto the end of our array. Finally, what if we wanted to remove an item from an array? We can do that using the unset command. So if we wanted to get rid of France, for example, from this array, we would just use unset and then the name of the array, so third array, and then the name of the item that we wanted to get rid of. And if we have a look at that, then that will be the same, but without France. We can also use that on variables. So if you create a variable and you want to delete it for some reason, then you would use unset to do that. Great. That's all you need to know about arrays at this point. In the next video, we're going to move on from variables and arrays and look at things which affect the flow of our code, specifically if statements and loops.